Hello, everybody. Hey, everybody. Dr. Reed here. Today, let me wait a few minutes and so I can allow a few people to come in. Today's discussion is going to be on the prefrontal cortex. If I had to choose a cortex for my favorite, it would be the prefrontal cortex. Here's the reason why. There's a lot of very important things. And most importantly, they believe the prefrontal cortex is where the ego is located. I think specifically in the right dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, I think, if I can remember it right. But hopefully we'll see it here. And this is a very important part of the human experience. This is the part of the brain that receives the input from the hippocampus, and it assimilates the information and sort of comes up with some type of abstract formulation of what's going on, some abstract reasoning going on. And this prefrontal cortex is very important because it's the seat of your abstract reasoning. So, if a person is unable to perform operations in that prefrontal cortex, then they may not be able to access abstract reasoning. And now we have two different worlds, a primary concrete world and one that's abstract. And so there are two worlds, concrete and abstract. I think this abstract world is sort of created by this prefrontal cortex and its functioning. So first, let me go ahead and look at, hopefully I don't have to pay for this thing here. Okay, let's see here. Okay. So first, let me see, explain the function of the prefrontal cortex. First, let me go back and show you what the prefrontal cortex looks like. This is it, y'all. So this is the front part of the brain. This is the back part here. This area here is the prefrontal cortex. Now, it's hard to delineate the boundaries of the prefrontal cortex here just by observing the structure of the brain. You have to use sort of probes to sort of electrically probe the areas. And the prefrontal cortex is sort of it's a predominant region where if you stimulate it, it doesn't result in some type of motor activity. So that's one of the ways they try to map out the prefrontal cortex. But we're talking here. So of course, we want to look at the blood supply that goes through there. We want to look at the nerve bundles that goes there. So this is the part we're talking about. Let me see if I can show you maybe a different viewpoint. Okay. Look here. Look at the. Okay. So that's the prefrontal cortex. So let me go here to Grok and here. Okay, explain the function of the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex, or PFC, is located at the front of the brain in the frontal lobe, right? Is a critical region responsible for higher order cognitive functionings. That's it. Higher order cognitive functions that distinguish humans from other animals. Grok, it says it clear. It's very clear. The higher order cognitive functioning is to be able to take remember the hippocampus gives you declarative, meaning just the facts. It's able to give you the pieces of information, but I believe it's the prefrontal cortex that puts it all together. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. Imagine a person in a pit that was so deep that they couldn't climb out of the pit, right? And so you're looking at the cartoon of a man in a pit, and it's too tall for him to get out of the pit. But if you look around the pit, you see pieces of wood. Let's say there's 10 pieces of wood. You look at the pieces of wood and you say, hey, I can put those pieces of wood together to create a ladder, right? The fact that you can see a ladder out of those pieces, that's the higher ordered cognitive functions we're talking about. And that reflects abstract reasoning, because a ladder is more of an abstract concept, particularly if you're stuck in a pit and you're just looking with pieces of wood. And so the solution here for the gentleman who has access to abstract reasoning is that this shouldn't be a major dilemma. I can simply assemble the pieces and climb out of the pit, right? But if the person doesn't have access to this higher order cortical functions, then probably look at the wood and say, hey, it may be a while before I get some help. I may start to use this as firewood. So I may have 10 days to live. I may have 10 days to survive, 10 days worth of firewood down here. Those are two different outcomes and two different realities, two different worlds. So that's what we're talking about, the benefit of this prefrontal cortex, right? So here, but then again, this distinguishes humans from other animals, right? So we get impairment in the prefrontal cortex, and we have some of the behaviors, the hostility, the agitation, aggressiveness, combativeness, the rage, things that just similarly seen in the animal world, right? It acts as the brain's executive control center, right? Managing complex behavior and decision making. So as you can see, impairment in this lobe can have a significant impact on the person's capacity to behave, right? Here's the breakdown. Decision making and problem solving, right? Working memory, this is very important. It temporarily holds and manipulates information, right? This is very important. Impulse control and self-regulation, right? Attention and focus, yeah. Planning and organization, social behaviors and empathy, cognitive flexibility. And look here, if you were to look at any of the neuroscience tests or anything like that, they basically cover these areas, decision makings. The PFCs evaluates options, weighs consequences, and make decisions based on goals and values. Remember when the best decision, less is more. The less you meddle with things, probably the better the outcome will be for you. And I think it has something to do with the decision making and problem solving capacity, because once you start to take time to really process the things around you or the situation around you, you will likely come up on your own with a completely different decision. So this is one of the reasons why acting impulsively or acting without really considering what's happening, while it's so consequential and how it can be so detrimental to you by simply reacting to things. Um, the Out of the overwhelming majority of the actions that someone takes, if they were to sit down and sort of go through the process of analyzing this situation, they will not likely make any decision about it at all. They will likely walk away as the best solution to the issue. Working memory. Okay, it temporarily holds information and manipulates information, like remembering a phone number, long enough to dial it or keep it on track. Okay. Okay. So working memory, temporary holds and manipulate information. Now, this is very important because and this is why the hippocampus is so important. The hippocampus will receive the information and move it to the prefrontal cortex. And if the working memory capacity is impaired, then the person would not get the information into their brain to even be considered in the first place. So for example, the man in the pit with 10 pieces of wood, this person may only have the capacity to remember 2 or 3 of the 10 pieces. And so when their prefrontal cortex goes to sort of render a solution, it only renders a solution based upon 2 or 3 pieces of information, not on 10 pieces of information. And that's probably one reason why they couldn't figure out that this was actually a ladder in the first place, because this working memory is impaired. So the working memory is very important. Impulse control and self-regulation, right? The PFC inhibits impulse controls and behaviors. Okay. The PFC inhibits impulsive behaviors and regulates emotions. It is why you can resist eating a whole cake or staying calm during a heated argument, right? Attention and focus. It distracts attention to relevant tasks while filtering out distractions. Planning and organization. The PFC enables you to set goals, create strategies, and break tasks into manageable steps, like organizing a project, or scheduling your day. Look, social behavior and empathy. It possesses social cues, helps interpret others' intentions, and guides appropriate social responses. This is key to understanding empathy and navigating social interactions. Yep. Cognitive flexibility. The PFC allows you to adapt to new situations, shifts perspectives, and think creatively. It will help you pivot when a plan fails or consider something else's point of view. So, as you can see, it's very important. This prefrontal cortex is a very important structure here. Let me see if we have any other questions so far. So let's see here. Okay. Hey guys, how's it going? Appreciate your support. Let's see here. How does modern society feed and shape the ego through the brain? In the early developmental process, the ego is in the process of being formed. And so the person relies on all of the people around them, particularly the primary caregiver, the family, to help reflect what's happening with them. So early on, we're dependent upon this external component of our ego, which is our society, our culture, our belief systems, serving as an external ego. And that helps us understand what type of boundaries we should have, or limitations we should have, or how we should perceive things. And so That's how society shapes it. Society gives you some type of identity, right? And right now, so identity is basically based upon pigment color, right? And as complex as a human is, you divide all humans based upon pigmentation. Why not group everybody based upon height? You know, um, let's see. Yeah. Hey, iHash, how's it going, buddy? Is the ego always negative, or does it serve a protective function? Um, I often give an example of the man who is starving in the desert, you know, um, starving in the desert and thirsty, right? And he's crawling on his knees and trying to make it through the desert. And all of a sudden, he sees um, an oasis. We know it's a mirage. So he sees a water in front of him. He hears the water. He can feel he get people drinking water, people wasting water, splashing in water everywhere. He sees a mirage, and he sees it there. He believes it there. And if you were to tell him that it's not an illusion, he won't believe you. Why? Because its ego is creating that illusion for him. It's creating it through a process called projection. And it's what happens around all of us all the time. This is a projected world. And so he goes and he continues to sort of keep moving and striving, and he keeps going and crawling. And finally, he gets to where the water's supposed to be, and he realizes it's not any water there, right? It was all an illusion, right? However, crawling those extra 2 kilometers may have saved his life, because now he can probably be seen. So in this situation, the ego serves to sort of protect you, but the situations may not be appropriate for how it applies how it applies its remedies. In this case, it made the man believe that there's something that wasn't there, and the man pursued it. You could have said that these were hallucinations or delusions and stuff like that. That's what we would call them. But it's a projection by his ego, and his ego is trying to preserve him, preserve his life. Let's say here, next question here. What are the implications of the development of prefrontal cortex, the implication of the development of prefrontal cortex during the adolescent legally? Okay, so what are the implications of not developing the prefrontal cortex? I don't think there's any legal remedies, but we see that in a lot of cases of abuse. So when you see victims of abuse, particularly victims of narcissistic abuse, the injuries occur particularly in the prefrontal cortex. And if you look at the damage and the damage that the victims of narcissistic abuse or chronic stalking or PTSD have, the damage located here in his prefrontal cortex. And so let's look at this. Remember, difficulty making decisions and solving problems, right? Very forgetful, impulse control, rage attacks, anger attacks, confrontational, argumentative. Oh, yeah, I'm still here. Okay. Attention and concentration processing, planning and organizing, social behavior, right? Cognitive flexibility, difficulty working. So the point of narcissistic abuse is to actually control your ego. And one of the ways they control your ego is basically get you to abandon your reality and live in theirs. And anytime you go back into your reality, you're going to have to face the disturbances that they intentionally create from you by interrupting the information in your prefrontal cortex. Who'd have thought they'd be so sneaky as that? These people understand how to disrupt your brain functioning so that you have problems at work, so you have problems with your relationships, where you have problems with your friends, and they destroy all of these things and hope and for you to return back to their world. See, narcissism and all this abuse is about someone forcing you live in their reality under a character that they determine with rules that they've already set for you. And anytime you get out of those rules, particularly leave their reality, meaning put yourself first, then they attack you with these things, right? So that's the prefrontal cortex. Next, let me see let's look at the blood supply. Let's look at the blood supply. Display the blood supply in the prefrontal cortex. The blood supply to the prefrontal cortex, located in the frontal lobe of the brain, is primarily provided by branches of the anterior cerebral artery and the middle cerebral artery, which are parts of the internal carotid artery system. Remember that bifurcation right there between the common carotid, the internal carotid, and the external carotid? And then all the gook that happens right there at that junction. And so you can get buildup of the cholesterol plaques that narrow the lumen of the arteries. And if you narrow the lumen of the arteries, then you interfere with the blood supply to both the anterior cerebral artery and the middle cerebral artery. And so you want to look at increased cholesterol plaques and then strokes, very high chronic high blood pressure, hypercholesterolism, diabetes, and things like that as risk factors here. These arteries deliver oxygenated blood to the prefrontal cortex high metabolic demands due to its role in complex cognitive functioning. Yeah, high metabolic demands. Yeah. Okay, here, let me just, I'm going to show an image of the, I'm going to start at the common carotid and then go up. Let's see here. Oh, do I have it here? Okay, so here is the common carotid artery right here. Now here's the external one here. Here's the internal one. This is the one we're talking about here. Going up here, look at this, going up there. Look at that route. And then here's the distribution here. It'll be in this area, in this region here. Yeah. So this is the internal carotid. So this is one of them. And then the middle cerebral artery, I believe the junction is somewhere around here. Okay, so all right. Okay, we saw which one was it we saw? Okay, the common carotid. We turn the internal carotid. Okay, here, okay, anterior cerebral, and let me show these. Okay, so yep, I showed the internal carotid system there. Now let me go from the internal carotid system to the, internal carotid. Okay, hopefully I'll see how it breaks off. Okay, so let's see, internal carotid. Okay, we got an internal carotid here, but I want to see how it breaks. I want to see how it bifurcates. All right, and then let's see branches. Well, let me just go ahead and go to middle cerebral artery. Okay. Middle cerebral artery, right? I wish I could show. So the internal carotid would be going into the picture. And I guess when it bifurcates here, it changes. Well, okay, middle cerebral artery, and then the So middle cerebral artery, okay, it arises from the internal carotid and travels longitudinally along the sylvian fissure. It supplies the lateral prefrontal cortex, okay, and the anterior cerebral artery. It originates from the internal carotid artery and runs along the medial surface of the brain. It supplies the medial prefrontal cortex. So the anterior cerebral artery supplies the medial prefrontal cortex, and the medial cerebral artery covers the lateral prefrontal cortex. Okay, sounds good. Venous drainage, I don't think we need to look into that. Microcirculation, I don't think we need to look at that. Okay, circulation. Okay, stroke. Blockage or rupture of the anterior cerebral artery or MCA can lead to prefrontal cortex damage, causing cognitive and behavioral problems. Okay. Aneurysm, the anterior ACA is a common site for aneurysm, yeah, which can disrupt the prefrontal cortex. Okay. Techniques, and we can pick it up on an MRI. Okay, so yeah, so that's interesting here. All right, so right now I'm at 26 minutes. Let me just look at the networks, the nerve networks. So let me just look at the networks going through that section, and we're going to look at the receptors on those networks. Okay. Complex stuff. I didn't know I was going to present like this. I was going to look for so this is too in depth. Let me look for the receptors. What? Okay, let me just ask. What are the receptor profiles on the prefrontal cortex? I think I'm out. I think I'm out here. So let me see here. Let me, okay. Hold on 1 second, guys. Okay, guys, back. Okay, so I wanted to at least go show the receptors on that prefrontal cortex, and so at least you would get an idea of the different type of medications we can use to sort of treat the dysfunction in that area. So here, remember the dopamine receptors, D1 and D2. Remember the typical antipsychotics are primarily D2 receptors, whereas the atypical bind both. The atypical also have other receptors like serotonergic receptors here, glutamate receptors here. Remember, the glutamate is the main excitatory neurotransmitter. Sometimes I try to use Namenda as an agent to sort of decrease glutamatergic activity if they seem to be too easily excitable. GABA receptors, and so benzodiazepines may be helpful in terms of inhibiting impulses. So GABA is the major inhibitory neurotransmitters. And of course, you have the interaction between the two. But so, yeah, so dopamine receptors, serotonin, glutamate, and GABA receptors located throughout the prefrontal cortex. I think that's all I wanted to do for today. And if you have any other questions, please put them in the comments and I'll try to get to them if I can. But otherwise, it's a pleasure speaking to everyone. And until then, I'll talk to you guys later. Take care. Read out. Bye now.